The night cracked open with a sound that did not belong to storms or sirens, but to a human heart-giving way, and it came from the thin wall between my living room and the small blue house next door. It was the sound of a man reaching the end of his strength, the kind that carries years of silence inside it. And when I realized my neighbor was standing on his porch with his shoulders shaking and his face turned toward the dark, I knew something irreversible was about to happen. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe kindness and second chances can still change lives, please take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these real, human stories alive. I had lived in Cedar Ridge, Ohio long enough to know the rhythms of the neighborhood. Lawns were trimmed on Saturdays, porch lights flicked on at dusk, and neighbors waved with the same polite distance Americans perfect over time. My neighbor, Michael Turner, fit into that rhythm almost invisibly. He was in his early 40s, worked long hours at a warehouse outside town, and drove a dented gray pickup that always smelled faintly of motor oil. We exchanged nods, sometimes a wave, sometimes a few words about the weather, but nothing more. He lived alone, and I never saw visitors, not on holidays, not on weekends, not even on his birthday, which I only learned about later. He was the kind of man you could live beside for years without ever really seeing. That changed the night his strength ran out. Earlier that evening, I had been sorting old photographs at my kitchen table, the kind that remind you of who you used to be before life hardened its edges. My wife, Rachel, had passed away 2 years earlier after a quiet battle with cancer, and grief still moved through my house like a draft I couldn't seal. When the sound came through the wall, raw and uncontrolled, it cut through my memories and pulled me back into the present. I stepped onto my porch and saw Michael gripping the railing, his back bent as if the weight of his life had finally become too heavy to carry. He didn't speak at first, just breathed hard, like someone who had run too far without stopping. Then he looked at me, eyes red, face hollow, and said he couldn't take it anymore. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly, like a confession he had been holding inside for years. I invited him inside without thinking. Some instinct older than logic took over, the same instinct that once made Rachel stop for stranded animals on the side of the road. Michael hesitated, pride and fear wrestling inside him, but eventually he followed me in. We sat at opposite ends of the couch, the space between us filled with unsaid things. I didn't ask questions right away. I remembered how people had crowded me with words when Rachel died, how all I wanted was silence and permission to exist in my pain. Over time, the story came out, not in neat order, but in pieces. Michael had grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes that taught him how to survive but never how to belong. He married young, hoping love would fix what childhood had broken, but the marriage collapsed under financial stress and unhealed wounds. The divorce left him paying support he could barely afford, estranged from a daughter he saw only in photographs on social media. At the warehouse, hours were cut, then increased again without warning, leaving his body exhausted and his mind constantly anxious. Bills piled up. Sleep disappeared. Loneliness became a permanent resident. And that night, after another letter from the bank and a voicemail he couldn't bring himself to listen to, something inside him finally snapped. I realized as he spoke that this wasn't just about one bad day or one bad year. This was the accumulation of a lifetime of being unseen, unheard, and unsupported. And I saw myself in him more than I expected. Grief had taught me how thin the line was between holding it together and falling apart. The difference, I realized, was not strength, but connection. In the days that followed, Michael and I developed a quiet routine. We drank coffee on the porch before work when our schedules aligned. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. I introduced him to my pastor, Thomas Caldwell, a gentle man with a voice that made you feel like forgiveness was possible. Michael started attending a small support group at the local church, not because he suddenly found faith, but because he needed a room where people listened without fixing him. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his posture changed. He stood a little straighter. He laughed once, surprising both of us. Change didn't come easily or quickly. There were setbacks, days when Michael looked as hollow as that first night, weeks when bills still didn't add up and the future felt like a closed door. But there were also small victories. He negotiated new hours at work. He started seeing a counselor through a community program. Most importantly, he wrote a letter to his daughter, not to demand anything but to apologize for his absence and tell her he loved her. When he finally mailed it, his hands shook like a man releasing something sacred into the world. One afternoon, months later, I came home to see Michael in his yard, painting the peeling fence he had ignored for years. He looked tired, but alive. He told me he had received a response from his daughter. She wasn't ready to meet yet, but she thanked him for writing. She said she needed time. It wasn't a reunion, but it was hope, and hope was something Michael had learned not to expect. Watching him that day, I understood something that grief had been trying to teach me since Rachel died. Healing doesn't arrive like a miracle. It arrives like a neighbor who opens a door. It arrives in coffee cups and quiet company. It arrives when someone listens without judgment and stays when it would be easier to walk away. Near the end of the year, on a cold evening lit by early Christmas lights, Michael stood on his porch again. This time, his shoulders were relaxed. He told me he still had hard days, that the voice telling him he wasn't enough hadn't disappeared completely, but he also told me he no longer believed it all the time. He had plans now, small ones, like taking a class in logistics management, like saving for a better truck, like maybe seeing his daughter in person someday. He said that night months ago scared him, but it also saved him, because it forced him to finally let someone see his pain. Before this story ends, please comment below and share one small act of kindness you believe can change someone's life. Your words might be exactly what another viewer needs to read today. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you felt, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement tells us these stories matter, and it helps them reach the people who need them most. I still live next door to Michael Turner. We still don't talk every day. We don't need to. Some nights we just sit on our separate porches, the space between our houses no longer a wall but a bridge, and every time I see his porch light on, steady and warm in the dark, I am reminded that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they can't take it anymore, and sometimes the smallest response can change everything.